Hello, fellow Liberty University students. My name is Forrest Lajeunesse, and I'm here to speak about the impact that Methodism has had on the fabric of America. The precepts and foundations of Methodism were started in England, but one could say they were fermented and refined with a unique flavor of American independence and frontier grit. John Wesley believed that God's aim in rising up the Methodists was to reform the nation, more importantly the church. While Wesley was speaking about England and the Anglican Church, his vision applied much more to the United States. In fact, Bishop Matthew Simpson asserts the rise of Methodism was co-evolved with the revolutionary spirit. Methodism succeeded in America because it overcame rigid British attitudes and instead embraced the dynamic and democratic ways of America. George Whitefield came to America not to preach about the law or church membership requirements, but instead to preach of spiritual rebirth in the eyes of the Lord. Whitefield had a theatrical style in the outdoor meetings that could draw crowds of thousands to hear his words and be caught up in his religious fervor. Americans are still drawn to preachers and ministers teaching in the same bombastic styles, something that is still seen with televangelists and megachurch pastors. These outdoor meetings attracted all those who traditionally did not feel welcome or part of an established church: the poor, the farmer, and the laborer. Because of his travels and revivals, America had started to knit a common religious fabric. Not solely Methodist, although the influence was incredibly strong, but an evangelical revival awakening and a democratic structure of religion. Furthermore, since this religious awakening came, a country unified in purpose and cause eventually led to the Revolution. After the Revolutionary War, America again fell into a loss of religious fervor and attendance. The Anglican Church was viewed as a co-conspirator with the Crown. Churches had been leveled by the fighting, and again, Americans, more importantly, were mobile. They spread further and further west, and yet again, ministers and churches did not quickly follow them outwards. This is where Methodism thrived, with adventurous circuit riders willing to go out and preach to those on the frontier, opening and preaching with camp revivals in homes or at community gathering places. These riders were kind of a light artillery that God had organized to pursue and overtake the fugitives that had fled into the wilderness from His presence, and that they were bringing light and order to the chaos that was the American frontier. Many of these riders were risking their very lives into the wilds of the world and the savagery of the western frontier. William Warren Sweet eloquently stated that Methodist Church possessed or developed the best techniques for following and ministering to a moving, restless population, what the United States very much so was. The Methodists did this by preaching with lay ministers, lay leaders, using Armenian theology and a lot of literature. On the frontier, the Methodists encouraged class meetings. People of a town would gather together weekly and spend a few hours to pray, offering spiritual and emotional support and comforting those in times of need. Many of the people in the community would much rather spend time in these meetings than to hear a long-winded hellfire brimstone sermon. This allowed for people to grow intimate with the teachings instead of a preacher telling them how to feel or how to believe. This has contributed to the fierce independence many Americans have with their learning styles of the Scripture and their religion and their faith. Methodism has also had a strong hand in the teaching and education of Americans. As Francis Ashbury rode his circuits and organized them, he also promoted and had Sunday schools set up to promote literacy, writing, and math. Methodists have also founded a number of small liberal art colleges in the West, and they even founded the lauded universities and colleges such as Duke and Emory. One of the greatest things about Methodism that was brought into American culture was taught to them early by John Wesley. And that was the concept of not just being justified in the eyes of the Lord, but also living a life of sanctification. Wesley believed that true holiness arises out of selfless love for God and neighbor. The journey towards Christian perfection is therefore intrinsic to one's social ethic. Wesley was of the mindset that one did not just practice faith or religion, but he lived it. He sought to give service and provide for the needy, inasmuch that when Wesley departed this earth, he was, as one could say, poor of money but rich in service. In the 1800s, the new trend of social activism as a way of life became central to many in the Methodist movements and to the American fabric. This ethos was and still is strongly held by the Methodists. The sense of giving and helping and reforming society gave rise in the Yankee states to the abolitionist culture, although there were monumental splits in the church over slavery. The Methodists also had African American churches and ministers that worked independently. The temperance, women's rights, and other strong social gospel movements were at the forefronts of Methodist culture, with such women as Phoebe Palmer playing an active role in the church. The social gospel movements are still very much a part of American culture, and many Americans fight the relentless battle to promote social purity, uprightness, and fight against the secular shift in the culture. This is one of the most enduring aspects that Wesley and his followers have instilled deeply into the American fabric. Methodism has become a victim of its own social progressive stance. In the last 60 years, Methodism membership rates have plummeted severely in the United States as they've taken on more liberal values that tend to fall outside what is accepted within traditional Christian teachings. But its impact on the spirit of America is still strongly felt. In fact, the Pentecostal movement grew out of the Wesleyan teachings and owes much to the early Methodists that came before them. Thanks again, guys, for your time and watching my video, and I hope to hear some great feedback from you, and I'll see you in the next video.